This video tells the story of people aboard the First Fleet, their voyage to the ends of the earth and their lives at their mysterious destination. It is also about the Aboriginal people who watched the ships arrive and later interacted with the people who came ashore. For everyone involved, life would never be the same again. The story of the First Fleet begins in Britain during the Industrial Revolution, when low wages led to poverty, crime and overcrowded prisons. The British government decided to send their criminals to a distant place, as far from Britain as possible, and establish a colony at the same time. Captain Phillip had the job of equipping a fleet of 11 ships to transport convicts and supplies to their destination. John Hudson was an 8-year-old orphan working as a chimney sweep when he was arrested for stealing clothes. He was sent to prison with a sentence of transportation for 7 years, but was 13 when he finally sailed on the First Fleet ship Friendship, bound for Botany Bay. Another of the ships, Lady Penrhyn, carried 100 female convicts. Among them were Elizabeth Haywood, aged 13, sentenced to 7 years transportation for stealing clothes. Dorothy Handlin, listed as 82, with a 7-year sentence for perjury, that is, lying to a magistrate. Esther Abrahams, aged 20, sentenced to 7 years for shoplifting. She had her 2-month-old baby girl in the convict quarters with her. Below deck was dark, smelly and claustrophobic. When they sailed through the tropics, the air was stifling. The fleet had left England in May 1787, stopping at Tenerife, Rio and Cape Town to buy food and supplies for the new colony. When the ships left Cape Town, there was no map for their course. They sailed into uncharted waters. David Collins, a First Fleet officer, wrote in his journal, November 1787, "All communication with family and friends now cut off, we are leaving the world behind us to enter a state unknown." In the vast southern ocean, they experienced freezing weather, rough seas, and close encounters with whales almost as big as their ships. Finally, in January 1788, they reached their destination. After an 8-month voyage, the fleet arrived in Botany Bay. A few days later, they transferred to Sydney Cove, after their leader, Arthur Phillip, decided it was a better place for a settlement. Anchored in Sydney Cove, it must have been a huge relief for the convicts to know they would soon be on land again. However, looking to the forest edging the shoreline, they saw no roads, no fences, no buildings, just wilderness. What lay behind the trees? Seeing the dense bushland and hearing unfamiliar sounds, some were anxious about going ashore. Several were already planning their escape. On the other hand, some saw opportunity. James Roos, a convict with farming experience, saw that men like him would be needed and imagined possibilities ahead. Henry Cable was a convict determined to build a future for himself, Susanna and their baby. After what they'd been through in prison in England, here was a chance for a new life together, once they got used to the strangeness of the place. However, it wasn't only the British people facing strange new sights. Aboriginal people had lived in seclusion from the rest of the world for thousands of years, when one day they saw strange moving objects approaching from the sea. At first, the incoming vessels appeared as floating islands. Soon, pale-skinned creatures came ashore. There were varied reactions from the native people. Some were agitated by the newcomers, shouting, "Warra, warra!" "Go away." Others were curious and went to meet the strangers. Watkin Tench was a Marine officer eager to meet the native people he called Indians. He described a scene when some approached along the beach when his party landed. A 7-year-old boy from the ship was with Tench, holding his hand. He wrote in his journal, "The child seemed to attract their attention very much, for they frequently pointed to him and spoke to each other. As they came closer and saw the whiteness of his skin, they gave a loud exclamation, and one of the party, an old man with a long beard, came close to us. The Indian, with great gentleness, laid his hand on the child's hat and felt his clothes, muttering to himself all the while." But curiosity changed to caution as more and more white people landed, cut down trees and put up shelters across the cleared ground. The Aboriginal people saw strange animals and equipment brought ashore. From a safe distance they observed white people in chains. They saw some beaten. They witnessed the power of the white men's guns and decided Sydney Cove was a place to avoid. However, eventually, through a series of astonishing events, including kidnaps, escapes, payback spearings, negotiation and reunion, a friendly relationship developed between Governor Phillip and an Aboriginal man, Bennelong. By late 1790, Bennelong, with his wife Barangaroo and a number of their friends, decided to live most of their time in Sydney. Bennelong asked Phillip to have a brick house built for him near the governor's residence, on a headland which became known as Bennelong's Point. One evening in March 1791, Bennelong invited Phillip and his officers to a performance of music, song and dance around a campfire at Bennelong's Point. Bennelong Point is now the site of Sydney Opera House. One of the officers, Captain John Hunter, clearly enjoyed the evening performance at Bennelong Point and described it in his journal. There appeared a great deal of variety in their different dances. A strong-voiced man sang the whole time, assisted by several young boys and girls who sat at his feet. This exhibition was well worth seeing. At the conclusion, we repeated the words "Bourgerie Carabari," a good dance. These signs of pleasure in us seemed to give them great satisfaction. However, not all Bennelong's people were happy about the British settlement. They wanted to continue their traditional way of life. One of these was Pemulwuy, who spent his life trying to preserve the rights of his people. Meanwhile, the Sydney settlement, despite incredible hardship, survived and expanded. The convicts had choices about their future. Some escaped. William and Mary Bryant made a bold attempt by stealing the governor's fishing boat and rowing into the Pacific Ocean with their 2 babies and 7 other convicts. During the same period, convict James Roos overcame many obstacles to declare himself self-sufficient on his very own farm. And convicts Henry and Susanna Cable were busy building a life they could never have imagined in England. By the mid-1790s, many Aboriginal people were living in Sydney Cove while retaining aspects of their traditional life. They traded fish and kangaroo meat for bread and rice. At the end of 1792, Bennelong decided to sail to England with Governor Phillip. But that's another story. If you'd like to know more about the adventures, dilemmas, mysteries and discoveries of these and other convicts, Marines and Aboriginal people, you can get these books from your library, bookstore or online. Across Great Divides is narrative non-fiction. The true stories are told through the words of those who lived in Sydney Cove in 1788. There's an index, bibliography and notes for every chapter. Stories of Life at Sydney Cove, a young reader edition, begins with the true story of John Hudson, an 8-year-old sentenced to 7 years transportation for stealing. See www.birongbooks.com for details. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please click like.